Let's talk about the Affliction Warlock Rework, because it has answered the prayers of everybody, almost everybody. There's still some unanswered, and the hero talents are actually doing some pretty cool work for Affliction, looking like a big upgrade in terms of overall gameplay, build, and performance, if I may say so myself, in the War Within. So let's start it off with what looks like to be the best class talent tree design in World of Warcraft, period, for one simple reason, and that is the lower amount of actual damage nodes, of which you have 6 this time, which some of them are still the ones that you have on live, that being Demonic Inspiration, Wrathful Minion, Socrathar's Guile, and Sargerai Technique, which pretty much do the same thing. You do have a new node, which is Demonic Tactics, that just increases the melee and spell critical strike chance of you and your summoned demon by 5%. Pretty standard, pretty bland, pretty passive. It's fine, it's more damage. And you still have Soul Conduit as an actual capstone, and that is it. Those are all of your damage nodes that you have access to, and that just gives you immense freedom over the rest of the talent tree to actually get all of the cool stuff that you want your warlock to have, whether it is a lot of healing, more defensives, mobility, gates, teleports. All of that is accessible and way easier to get. One cool new talent is also the capstone that replaced the old Drain Life capstone that nobody really used because it was a little bit bland, and that is Pact of Gluttony. This is really cool. Hellstones you conjure for yourself are now demonic hellstones, and they are red and can be used multiple times in combat. You heard that right. You can heal yourself with your Hellstone multiple times. You can actually go through all 3 of your Hellstones, and if the fight lasts long enough, you can create new Hellstones and get them again, because it does have a 1-minute cooldown. And with all of the Hellstone talents augmentation that you have throughout your talent tree, this makes it an incredible sustain option for warlocks that is probably unparalleled, maybe even by Death Knights themselves. And there's also one last new talent, which is Swift Artifice, reducing the cast time of your Soulstone and Create Hellstone by 50%. Obviously, reducing the cast time of Create Hellstone is really cool because it functions as Diabolic Hellstone if you have to create them in combat, and you might have to if the fight lasts longer than 4, 5, 6 minutes, or if it's one of those Razageth fights that lasts more than 10 minutes, then this is going to be really good. But probably the best thing about it is reducing the cast time of Soulstone, which, as a very immobile caster that has to cast a lot of the time, you do have to spend a lot of time casting your Soulstones, and usually that happens when the combat is very hectic, everybody just takes damage left and right, and having to stop everything that you're doing and cast for a long time to revive a party member just isn't that feasible. This makes it so much better. But let's see exactly what Affliction Warlock is getting in its actual talent rework, which a lot of them are going to be really great, and some a little bit questionable, not as questionable as the support of our Patreons who are making this video possible, and more videos like this coming into the future. It definitely actually helps us put more quality into our stuff and give you guys more content with the War Within Alpha and a lot of other live stuff as well. So if you like our content and you want to support us, consider checking our Patreon link down below. You'll also have access to some unique goodies like 4K wallpapers with your character tune on it, access to bloopers, early access videos, and more stuff for you to check out. So thank you very much for supporting the content. Let's talk about the spec talent trees for Affliction. One thing that you might notice right off the bat is that Malefic Rapture is no longer here. And no, it's not gone. Don't rejoice just yet. It is just baseline. We still have Malefic Rapture. And that is the controversial change here, because a lot of people don't like it. I'm not a big fan of it. I'm not opposed to it, but the reason I don't like Malefic Rapture is because it was always at odds with Seed of Corruption in terms of its AoE identity. Not anymore, because Seed of Corruption's AoE identity has just been reduced to spreading corruption. We no longer have Sow the Seeds, but instead we have Volatile Agony, where refreshing Agony with 10 or less seconds remaining deals AoE damage to all targets around it in 10 yards. You do have to refresh Agony, unfortunately, in AoE. First of all, that's not a fun thing to do. As a dot class, it never has been fun. It's not fun for balance, it's not fun for shadow. I understand that there has to be some payoff to maintaining your AoE dots. I feel like if Balanced Druid can have a dot extension through its Starfall, and it has even fewer dots to manage than Affliction, then Affliction should have something like that as well. But if we're not gonna have that, then this is the next best thing to give it a little bit of a payoff to get your Agony on. And this might actually work really well with the Hellcaller hero talents, and we'll get to that in a minute. Another big thing that changed that's very positive for Affliction is that Siphon Life is gone. Not really gone, but it's now a passive, and then now it boosts Corruption's damage by 20% and transfers the damage that it does into heal back to you, so kind of retaining that fantasy of, you know, life sustained through your dots. That's core of Affliction, but you don't have to actually spin the plate of Siphon Life and increase your damage that way. It was just very tedious and annoying to use. Overall, through the talent tree, you'll see a lot of nodes being shifted around, and we're not going to talk about all of that. That's also probably not final, but I do want to mention a couple of new other talents as well. First of all, since we don't have the Sow the Seeds playstyle, we do have Call the Weak, a new talent which increases the damage of Malefic Rupture by 4% for each enemy it hits. Clearly, this makes it so that Malefic Rupture is your choice to spend your shards in AoE, also in single target, but at least you do have the clear indication where it's no longer confusing of, oh, am I using Seed here or am I using Malefic Rupture, because Seed still does damage, it just doesn't deal as much damage or hit as many targets as before. Shard generation has also been addressed and really boosted for Affliction with two new talents: Empowered Unstable Affliction, where it reduces the cast time of Unstable Affliction and it gives it a chance to generate a soul shard. We don't know how much that is, but it's very obvious and very tangible when you actually play your Affliction rotation. And Relinquished. Agony has 1.25 times the normal chance of generating a soul shard. Once again, that is very abstract. I think the chance of Agony generating a soul shard is known, it has been mathed out, and it scales differently in AoE, so you don't just degenerately just generate a million shards per second. But if you take these two talents, you'll definitely feel it, and you might not need these two talents always, so they're not mandatory, because I believe with Soul Harvester you don't really have a big issue of soul shard generation. Soul Swap has also been taken away, which is another kind of a negative change in terms of its rework. I don't know if there was a problem with Soul Swap having a place in the Affliction talent tree, because I did find it very useful on fights like Nimue and Amir Drasil, where you have to swap from the boss to the ad and the boss becomes invulnerable, so you want to take your dots from the boss and put them on the ads to reduce the amount of time required for you to get your ramp going, which was something that people have definitely been asking for years, and now we only had it for one expansion. Not a lot of fights where this is useful, but the fights that this is useful on, they're very good. So I hope we can get it back. I hope they think back on removing Soul Swap. And in place of the Grimoire of Sacrifice, which hasn't gone, it's just a choice node in the middle with Summoner's Embrace that just gives you flat out 3% more damage, you now have Cunning Cruelty. Actually, the most fun talent that Affliction has, because it is the most visual talent that Affliction has. Shadow Bolt and Drain Soul have a chance to trigger a Shadow Bolt volley, dealing damage to 5 enemies within 10 yards of the current target. That is really fun, and you definitely see all the Shadow Bolts flying all over the place. It doesn't require you to press any additional buttons, it just naturally works off of your filler spells that will be casted quite often because you will be using Nightfall. And now you don't even have to use Drain Soul if you don't want to, because as a choice node with Drain Soul you have improved Shadow Bolt, where the cast time of Shadow Bolt is reduced, thank you, by 15%, and its damage increased by 40%, quite a bit of damage increase, which makes it more appealing to be used for people who really like Shadow Bolt. And just because it's also related to this, Shadow Embrace has been changed, where now it will only stack 2 times if you're using Shadow Bolt, up to a total of 8% more damage, and 4 times if you use Drain Soul, still up to 8% more damage, but probably to kind of match the difficulty into scaling the stacks of Shadow Embrace. And I don't know if I'm a big fan of the 4 stacks required for Drain Soul, but I'm definitely a big fan for the 2 stacks of Shadow Bolt, making it easier to manage, I suppose. And Dread Touch, and with the choice node, the Doom Blossom, I believe, have also been removed from the talent tree, considering that, you know, you don't have Seed anymore, and Dread Touch was yet again another annoying plate spin to have. You now have Oblivion, an actual new spell, which is a 45-second cooldown channeled ability that deals oh so much damage over 3 seconds, and its damage is increased by 10% up to 30% for each dot on the target, making it really cool in single target. The rest of the capstones are pretty much the same. You have had a reduction in the bloat of the additional nodes that you need to get all the way to the bottom. Dark Glare, just as a side note, is still severely undertuned. I'm not sure what the design direction with this is, since it feels untouched and even neutered since Grim Reach is going away. And one last thing to add, in the middle of the talent tree we have 2 new nodes that address critical strike chance, whether it is to incentivize people getting crit or just to reward crit as in general, we don't know yet. But you do have Malediction that increases crit chance of your dots by 5 or 10%, and Contagion that increases the crit damage of your dots by 15 or 30%, which can be very beefy and might actually require some simming to see exactly how good they are. And with that, we can move into the Hellcaller talent tree, which is unfortunately the more boring one of the two, and it's not actually aptly named, at least from the feeling of playing it. I didn't really feel like a Hellcaller Warlock. I just had an extra play to spin in Wither, which is basically replacing your corruption, but it does have some neat interactions with how it's gaining stacks over the course of the fight and deals more damage, and the number of stacks goes up and down through different mechanics. You have stuff like Blackened Soul, spending soul shards further corrupts enemies affected by your Wither, increasing the stack count by 1. Each time Wither stack increases, it has a chance to become acute, dealing more damage and losing 1 stack every second until you remain with 1 stack in total. Wither will always become acute after reaching 8 stacks or when the target is within execute range, basically 20% HP or lower. It's a nice, loopy mechanic of its stack management, and you manage this way more with stuff like the Capstone, for instance, which is Malevolence, an actual ability, 1 minute cooldown that matches really well with Soul Harvest. Dark magics erupt from you and corrupt your soul for 20 whole seconds, causing enemies suffering from your withers to take a lot of Shadow Flame damage and increase the stack of withers by 3. While corrupted, your active withers are acute by default and your haste is increased by 15%. Malefic Rupture grants 1 additional stack of wither to targets affected by your unstable affliction. That's just basically single target, but this essentially manipulates the stacks of wither and you get a lot of haste. And considering that it's a 1 minute cooldown and the Soul Harvest talent that reduces its cooldown by 15 seconds has been taken away, you can just use both of these in conjunction to get massive amounts of haste and just explode in damage, which brings a really cool flavor to Affliction. Now, the rest of the talent trees are just passive damage increases, some utility additions. There are some bugs here, like Mark of Xavius doesn't seem to work, and this was to be one of the cooler changes in Hellcaller, where in the live game it says that Agony damage is increased and becomes a combo skill where if you recast it, it casts on a second target, which is similar to what Shadow Priest has and Twin Moons from Balanced Druid, but it doesn't work. It does actually nothing. However, on the Wowhead talent calculator, it says that it's supposed to be Wither and not Agony that does this. I sincerely hope it is Agony, because it would work way better with the volatile Agony talent that we've seen before, where refreshing Agony just deals AoE damage. And Ilhoof's design just seems to work backwards, where you're supposed to be sacrificing 10% of your max health to make Soul Leech absorb more HP overall, but it seems like my Soul Leech is smaller when I have Ilhoof's design together with my total HP as well, so there's some mathing issues going on over there in the application of this talent. The cooler version of the hero talent tree is definitely the Soul Harvester, which is also the one that has the way better visuals, and that comes with its core functionality, Demonic Soul, where the tooltip of it is very fancy and says a lot of things that don't really matter. What matters is that you have a chance to make your next Malefic Rapture be free and increase its damage by 20%, and when you cast it, a demonic entity pops up and just deals shadow damage to everything hit by Malefic Rapture, which is really cool, and then it just gets cooler as you put more points into the hero talent tree. Soul Anathema is basically when that demon pops out, it just puts a dot on everything that just deals a lot of damage. It might just be one of the reasons why Malefic Rupture was buggy on the alpha, where you just see me pull everything in the dungeon, period, giving Preach a very hard time to actually tank the key. So I'm sorry, man, not my fault. And it only gets better with the gameplay loop of Nightfall, because you do have stuff like the Shared Fate and Feast of Souls choice node, which Shared Fate is just AoE damage proc, but Feast of Souls is better because it actually gives you another succulent soul to use your malefic rapture on, and this gets buffed by the next one, which is quietus, making nightfall consumption give you the Feast of Souls mechanic regardless of the target dying, giving you that malefic rapture proc. And then you also have Mantle of the Harvester, where corruption deals more damage, but haunt also triggers nightfall, feeding into that gameplay loop. Now, of course, this means you'll have to take haunt, which is what it is, and with the capstone you'll have to take soul rot as well, because the capstone makes soul rot give you Shadow of Death for 15 seconds. While Shadow of Death is active, casting malefic rapture always invokes your demonic soul, and your demonic soul deals more damage, meaning that you will have to pull shards for your soul rot, and once you do, every soul shard you consume for 15 seconds spawns that demon that just blasts everything around. And I have to say that visually this looks fantastic, and I would imagine that in the actual performance realm it does really good damage as well. Overall, the rework of Affliction is going into a really good direction. Whether you like Malefic Rapture or not, it does feel like it's getting a proper design and a proper love, hopefully changing our minds about it in the future. There still feels like there's some work that needs to be done for Affliction to bring it to, let's say, Fire Mage levels, which Fire Mage might just be the best class in World of Warcraft, and we already have a video on it explaining why that is true and why it probably has some of the best hero talents ever. Maybe Affliction can be that cool as well.